Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our community consultations regarding the Street Checks carding review. My name is Kika Ojo, and I'm your facilitator for this evening. You'll meet a couple other of my colleagues, and you'll notice that there are a number of our colleagues around the room. You'll know who the team members are because they'll be wearing these white tags. So feel free if you have any questions or comments to offer those to those folks. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. Please have your full with dinner. Feel free to eat throughout the evening. The washrooms are closer to the front, so if you go that way, you'll notice the one set of washrooms to the left. I think they're both on that side. I'm not sure. I might be mistaken. Sorry about that. Yes. Okay. Thank you. We also, upon request, have tokens, transit tokens, available for folks who might need them. If you would see Roxana, who's at the registration table at the front. Also, with regard to French translation, we have an interpreter that is sort of working through the meeting, and if you would like to have a headset to listen to the process or participate in the process in French, you may do so if you check out our guys at the back for a headset. I think that, and the additional piece is around parking here. So we acknowledge that that parking in the back is probably full. If you are parked to my right, in the parking lot to my right, so not this property, but the next door neighbor's property, we would suggest highly that you move your car and note that you can park anywhere on the road on Huntington between the white lines. Okay, so if that is you, please take the time to move your car. Probably now is a good idea. So those are just some housekeeping pieces. Tonight is really about listening to you as our community, and so we want to get through the sort of the logistics and move on to that. I'd like to invite my colleague Danielle Dowdy to, I'm going to invite Justice Tulloch. As most of you know, Justice Tulloch is appointed to do this review, and so he will be here listening all evening, but I'd like him to welcome you. So, Justice Tulloch. Thank you.
I want to thank you, Kike, for those introductory words. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. As indicated, we're here to listen to you, and what we want to say to you is that you should feel free to speak to us and not feel any kind of trepidation, because it's your experiences that will inform the report that we will eventually write. Now, as indicated, my name is Michael Tulloch. I'm a judge. I sit on the Court of Appeal for Ontario, and I was asked by the Ontario government to conduct this review on the regulation. It's called Regulation 5816, which was introduced in Ontario in 2016. Now, just before I get into my comments, I want to acknowledge that we are located on the land that first were inhabited by the Indigenous peoples and First Nations of this territory. I begin by acknowledging that these lands were the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, right? The Haudenosaunee, the Huron-Wendat, and the Mississaugas of New Credit. The territory was the subject of the dish with one spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. I also recognize the contributions of the Métis and Inuit and other Indigenous peoples and the contributions which they have made, both in shaping and strengthening this community, the province, and the country as a whole. Now, today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in this territory. Now, by acknowledging this traditional territory, we are recognizing and respecting the First Peoples of this country, and it is also the recognition of their presence and contributions both in the past and the present that we pay our respect to them. In my view, this acknowledgement is key to any relationship and reconciliation going forward. Now, I also, at this juncture, want to thank Tropicana Community Services for hosting us this evening. Tropicana Community Services is dear to my heart because as a young student, I was one of the youth members of the board. And, you know, I've seen the amazing work that this organization have done. I was on the board of this organization for about 5 years. And it's quite amazing the work that Tropicana is doing within this particular community. Now, by way of background, on June the 7th, 2017, I was appointed by the provincial government to lead a full and independent review of Ontario Regulations 5816. And this regulation outlines new rules on police street checks, or a practice that's generically referred to as carding. I will be reviewing the content of the regulation and assessing whether police officers, chiefs of police, and police services boards are following it. I will also assess whether the regulation reflects the important goal of ensuring that police and public interactions are consistent, bias-free, and done in a way that promotes public confidence and protects human rights. Now, since my appointment, I have assembled a team to assist me, and we have participated in a number of consultations across the province. Today's consultation marks the fourth of 12 public consultations throughout Ontario, and I intend to draw on what I've been learning from these consultations to write a report with recommendations on the regulation. That report will be submitted to the Government of Ontario on November the 30th, 2018, and made available to the public before January the 1st of 2019. Now, as a background for your discussion, Danielle Dowdy is going to come forward and sort of lead you through the logistics of how the evening is going to be proceeding. But you need to know that a street check is when a police officer asks someone for identifying information in a particular circumstance. The regulation applies if an officer asks you to identify yourself when they're looking into suspicious activities or investigating general criminality in the community. Now, by contrast, the new rules under the regulation do not apply if the officer is talking to a driver during a traffic stop, arresting someone, or investigating a specific crime. The regulation outlines what an officer must do if they ask for your identification. The regulation also provides information on the storage of information that comes from street checks, mandatory training for all police officers on the new rules, and public reporting requirements. With that background in mind, I look forward to this evening. I want to emphasize once again that this review is fully independent. We're not here as part of the Government of Ontario, and we do not represent, I don't represent the government, nor do I represent the police. I am independent. I am a judge, and that's the office that I stand in here this evening. So, I want you to feel free and to speak to us. And you can be rest assured that it doesn't matter how difficult your experiences or your stories are, you are going to be heard. Right? Meeting with you, in my view, and with all the other members of the various public communities where we will be going over the next little while, is a critically important part of this process. So I want to just let you know how grateful I am that you have taken the time to meet with us today. And I also want you to know that I appreciate that speaking about some of these issues may be difficult for some of you. So again, thank you for coming out tonight, and I look forward to hearing from you. And you can be rest assured that if you participate in this process, you will be heard. Thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Well, that sounds good. You sound full. Just before we get started, je vais faire une petite annonce en français. Si vous désirez un service d'interprétation vers le français, munissez-vous d'écouteurs. Vous les trouverez à l'arrière de la salle, près de la cabine où travaille notre interprète Violaine. Et Violaine, oui, bonjour. Okay. So thank you all for coming. I'm just going to go really quickly through this slideshow that kind of outlines what we're going to be doing this evening. I'm just going to skip through this because it's just talking about the regulation, but Justice Tulloch just went through what that is all about. We are hosting 12, or we're conducting 12 public consultations across the province. Tonight is our fourth one. We did 3 in Toronto. Tonight's our third and final Toronto meeting. Will be in Brampton on Thursday. And the goal of these public consultations is really to hear from you. So you'll see on the table there's an engagement guide. There's questions in this guide that's going to help facilitate the conversations, and there's questions in there that we want you to work through as a table and to be able to capture your answers so that we can have a good understanding of what it is that the community's thinking and feeling on these issues as they relate to street checks and training and data collection and all of the things that are touched on in the regulation. As a note, the review does not, we're not here to resolve actual or individual cases. And so it's important to hear from you and to hear your stories, but our team is not here to resolve a particular case. And so we understand that it might be difficult to share that, and we appreciate you sharing that with us, but we want you to understand that the stories that we do here inform our report and our recommendations when we get to that. And so the way that this works this evening is, this is the brief introduction. Then we're going to go right into the roundtable discussion. So if you're sitting at a table by yourself, if you could, hi, don't mean to point you out, but if you could join a table, there's empty seats if anyone wants to put their hand up if they got space at their tables, because really it's a group exercise and we want everyone to be able to talk together and to hear from each other. We're going to ask you to just appoint a point person to take notes, and then the third part of the evening is the report back session. So then we'll ask you, each table, to report back what was discussed at your table, any recommendations for us, and we'll be here taking notes. And finally, we are on social media, and we're tweeting under the hashtag StreetChecks, as you see up in the corner. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and then our website is there. if you see myself or anyone with one of these white tags here taking pictures, it's for our Instagram or for our Twitter account. If you don't want your photo taken, it's not an issue at all. Just let us know, and we'll move on. But if you see someone, taking your picture, that's what it's for. And you can even go online and you can join in on the conversation, or you can tweet at us. You can ask questions. You can post yourself as well. I've got a note here that there's a car being blocked. There's two cars blocking. I've got a silver Chevrolet with the license plate OFMH. And I don't have the second.
The second is a Buick DHFL410.
So that's a,
One of our elders is very anxious, but she can't leave very house. After a while,
valet service. We're a full service review team here. So, and I did I mention about taking photos? Yes, I did. Okay. Any questions at all? You'll see, like I said, our teammates. We all have on our name tags. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.
Thank you, Danielle. Okay, so now the fun begins. So as Danielle said, we're going to ask that you join tables to kind of fill them up. We will have between now, which is it's 6:39, so let's say 6:40 until 7:30 for your table conversation. As Danielle said, select someone to take notes and select someone to report back in the end, because at 7:30, I'm going to pop back up and we're going to go through from table to table to hear what you had to say. Does that sound fair? All right, so you have till 7:30. Thank you so much. Okay, so for those of you that came in sort of midway through this process, my name is Kika Ojo, and I am your facilitator for this evening. We asked tables to discuss the consultation questions on your table. That's on a white sheet. Hopefully you were able to get through most of those. If you don't have a seat, if you would join a table, that would be great. We'd appreciate that. We asked that you would select someone to take notes and someone to do feedback, like report back to the group. So we hope you've done that as well. By way of managing time, so we have a lot of people here tonight, and which is wonderful. But by way of managing time, I'm going to keep a pretty close look. I'm going to hold you to a time commitment pretty closely. And one of the ways that I do that is I let you know when you have a yellow card, which means your time is about to wind up. Like you have approximately 30 seconds after that. Okay, so when I say yellow card, you should be wrapping up your thoughts. Given the amount of tables we have, we're working with a 3-minute window per table. So keeping the report backs high level. Hopefully, those of you that took notes would be willing to leave them with us. So you'll notice there are staff around the room with tags like this. If you would leave your notes with those folks at the end of the evening, that would be much appreciated. So really trying to keep it high level. The first few tables will probably have the ideas that, well, they'll obviously have the ideas that no one has heard, so feel free to share. But as we move through the room, if your ideas have already been mentioned, you can say so, and then continue on with the fresh ideas. Does that make sense? Is that fair? Awesome. Thank you so much. So is there a table that would like to go first? So Dave is going to pass around the microphone, and we'll be in this corner first, sir, and then we'll come to you after, okay? Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
All right. So to answer to question number one, have you heard of street check? Have you heard of this? The answer is yes. The next question is, what does it mean to us, or why do we think it's happening? One, to get information from young people who don't know their rights. In some instances, power tripping, and gathering stats. The purpose of having these cards, frankly, is even doing this is unclear. Like why it's even necessary, frankly. Number three. None are aware of the new regulation. We haven't heard of it. Okay, pardon me, one was aware. 1.5. The next one is, okay, what can be done to bring awareness about the regulations? So one was through schools and educators, so in class actually having educators make this a part of what they actually share with their students, so they take time out so students understand their rights like this. And so in schools, there's through parents' campaigns, through commercials on television. They've been very effective with, we just heard about this new law with the cell phones and texting, and so they've been very effective at getting that one across. So if you can get that, same way you can do a campaign with this through television, and participation on, okay, church, through churches and Sunday schools, and, say again? Okay, are there any, number 5, are there any benefits? No. To carding. There's no benefits to carding people. When should police talk to the community? Well, when they frankly, be consistent, not just when there's a problem. Regular community engagement to build a relationship and trust. Develop training for police tools. Another sentiment that came up was that, frankly, if police are going to engage, then perhaps maybe since they seem to be just trained really to deal with an offense, and because they're law enforcement, then perhaps connect with us when there's a real reason for law enforcement. They ought to identify themselves and explain why that they are stopping, why they're stopping or having the conversation. That's for I was under number 7. The 8, this is the receipt, that's not for the receipt, right? Okay, so couldn't see the license. Okay, so we had a couple of us who have had instances where, yes, we were stopped, and there was no receipt given after the communication. Number 9, the issue of the receipt. Well, we'd never heard of this thing. It was called a receipt, but then when we looked at this statement here, it said the new rules do not apply if the officer is talking to a driver, arresting or detaining you, executing a warrant, or investigating a specific crime. But when you get conversations about fitting the description, well, what is that? Where does that fit? And then when you're talking about arresting or detaining, some of that comes after they've carded you and you've already engaged in a conversation that became hostile. So this seems like a sort of get out of jail free card, because it's really up to the discretion of the officer to do what they really want to do in that point in time. So it kind of nullifies the point, I guess, if you will.
I'm going to give you a yellow card, Noel, but just, I acknowledge that you're the first group, so
Sure.
work with me.
No problem.
Thank you.
Just let me know whenever you got a card off, no problem. So, so no one's heard the receipt. How can we ask for the receipt? Date, time, and location should be added to the receipt information if we're having receipts. So date, time, and location of the incident. The training is not effective under number 13. Number 14, continuous training, reviews of part of police performance review, or making it part of their performance review for officers if they're found to get bad report cards. We do not know how the data is being used. Number 15, 16, what should it be used for? We really don't know. Should the information be stored? Again, we don't even think the card should be there in the first place, to be frank. The individual police officer should have the info. Again, that part, I'm sorry, I'm a bit foggy on. Number 19 here. How many receipts should be issued? Say again? Oh man, you put me on Facebook Live, yo. Thank you. So say that again, Sharon. Okay, so, right. So, but right. And one question for Chief Justice, Justice Tulloch. Question: just within a rights situation, if somebody is pulled over or stopped by an officer, do we have the right to also record that interaction, like ourselves? Like, so if we want to go Facebook Live on it to keep everybody honest, so if they're doing their job, no problem, but if they're not, well, we have our, because the body cam there seem to be issues with that, when they're used and how frequently and all that kind of stuff. So is it legal for us to record our interaction with an officer? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Just for the record around questions, we are recording your questions, but if you recall or remember that we are not representing the government or the police, so we will. I can answer that question. And so fair enough. So one second, sir. So.
Sorry. Look, right, as a judge, I'm not here to answer any questions, unfortunately, right? But your questions are being recorded, and our report's going to reflect them. Okay? Thanks. And I can't let you answer questions either. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Justice Tulloch. Okay, thank you. Dave, if you would do this table next, please. This gentleman had his hand up before. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Is it on?
Yes, sir.
Oh, okay. Quite a few of the questions were already addressed. There are just a few things I may just tag on, so to speak. Random checks, number 2. Number 1 is yes. Number 2, random checks are arbitrary checks that seem to want information that does not seem applicable to the reason why a person was pulled over. And, well, an individual should know that. Number 3, yes, we are aware of the new regulations around this table. Most of us became aware through community newspapers, community print, and, of course, organizational discussions as well. Number 4, do members of the public know enough about this? We don't think so. We feel it's necessary that the community, schools, churches, and every facet of community gathering should be a platform for sharing this kind of information. I think it goes a lot to building the community with information, of course. You're armed, you're strong, and relationship with the police as well. Because the more you know as an individual, the more you can protect your rights. Number 5, yes, there are instances where street checks can be beneficial. In instances where it also can protect the public. For instance, if there's a known situation in the community of, we may say, a lot of guns, a lot of crime, then probably checks of that nature could be beneficial to the entire community. As well as if a curfew is on, you would need checks. When should police stop and talk to the people in the community? At all times. Because helping to foster a better community relationship is a big plus for any law. I mean, she's there to protect the community. And if the community trusts you, well, that's a big plus, because that could be leading to information and, many other benefits. Anyway. Number 8, really. 7, what obligation should police have when they stop and talk to people? They're obligated, number 1, to be respectful. Number 2, to clearly explain why this individual is being pulled over or stopped. Number 3, to talk about the police responsibility where the circumstance or situation explained is delivered or conveyed. So respect is a big thing. They're also obligated to be fair. And number 4, or did we have a number 4?
I'm going to give you a yellow card, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. Where am I? Where am I? Oh, number 8. Yeah. One person who was stopped and was let go once the police officer found out who she was. Oh, yes. Person at our table, of course, is the Consul General. Therefore, of course, she was on the diplomatic immunity. And not only that, she believed personally it is also vital for you to know or have an idea why you were stopped. How the police said she was speeding and she felt she wasn't. So who knows, maybe the reason for pulling her over was not valid or not, as they would say, kosher. Anyway, yeah. Number 9, a receipt. It is necessary for a receipt to be handed out. Of course, there are circumstances whereby it would not be, convenient or provided. Yeah.
Sir,
I'm
thank
going to
you.
leave the rest of
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. So just, again, to help us manage the time, really think about your salient points. We're writing everything down, so really think about what you think is important for us to take away. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ralph Chatur, and I'm just going to mention the things that weren't mentioned before. One of the things that's observed in law is this whole concept of psychological detention. When you put under examination by a person in authority and you're psychologically detained, it's as strong or powerful as being physically detained. Card checks, stopping invokes that. So the person, once there's a power differential, it's nice to know what you could do, but what actually happens is quite different. One of the things that came out in our table was that I didn't hear before was the whole issue of risk. There are some communities in which having a conversation with a police officer can put your life at risk. You could be deemed to be a snitch. So police have to be aware that long conversations, random stopping can actually put individuals at risk. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. The second thing we didn't hear a lot about, we had one female. On Thursday is International Day for Women, so we talk about how does this affect racialized women. There's not a lot of discussion on that. We believe that that needs to be probed. We don't have the answer. We understand that there may be more leniency. I don't know. So we're asking the Justice Tulloch to sort of probe that further on. I think there's a very salient point there for young females. The other thing that we talked about was the whole receipting system, the way it's issued, what happens with the information. We all know now, in law as in otherwise, that information, really, we don't think about it, but information is property. The question is, who owns that property? Who trades that property? How is that property used? How is it respected and for how long? There are a lot of gratuitous promises in the legislation. And I'll close with this. I will say that what concerns us is that information going to be used? The regulation promises that the information is not going to be used to look at performance metrics of police officers, but we know the whole joke, right? You didn't meet your quota, so you're giving me a ticket. Is this going to be an offshoot? The regulations say it's prohibited, but how do we know in actuality that it's not corrupt? Anything else? Okay, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hello there.
Hello.
I enjoyed that gentleman's statement there. Mine's going to be very brief. Let's see here. He mentioned a word property. If we ever look at the carding situation, what we present them is identification. Majority of our identification that is acceptable by any officer is going to be issued from the government. If anybody has ever looked under government ID, they will know that it says it's property of the government. Anybody who uses something that is property of someone else takes on the liability of that property. So when these guys are carding you, they're not carding you, they're carding the property that they own, which is the ID that you have presented them. Because it wasn't your ID, it was property of the government. The government has created millions of statutes for that ID to follow. So when a police officer stops you and says, show me the ID, he has millions of things he can come up with for why he stopped you. You think the problem is carding? The problem is the system we have, where an artificial person has been given to you as a conduit to live the rest of your life with, under subjection to what is so-called law. To have law, you need a victim. I read this officer, he was here earlier, I read him what a summons means. A summons is a lawsuit. The officer is saying, I'm suing you when he stops you in your cars. But how many go to court and say, where's the injured party? Where's the contract that we have? I did nothing to you, officer. I didn't hurt the stop sign. What if you had hit somebody? But I didn't. We all have knives at home. What if we kill our family tonight? Should we be arrested for having knives at home now? It looks funny to you, but this is where we're heading as a society, where they can make up anything on the fly and say you have to follow it. Today, yesterday, or tomorrow. Why? Because they're not acting on you, but a fiction ID that you present them.
Is the table satisfied? I wasn't sure. Thank you. Oh, okay. Sir, I'm warning you, 30 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm just going to point to something that's omitted there. When I'll use part of your story. When you get a traffic ticket, there's a penalty attached to each type of violation. Now, this here does not have penalties. I think that's a big omission, because unless you have police accountable, then everything is a joke. So I think for every infraction, there should be a penalty matching it. And it should be known to the public what that penalty will be. So they didn't give you they didn't tell you what your rights were. Well, that's a $100 penalty. They didn't do another thing. Oh, that's a $500 penalty. That's the only how you're going to get police to take this thing seriously. Because right now our life does not count. And you know, I always work with this brother. We have hundreds of these people, right? And that's how we're going to stop it, right? We have to make them pay, and that's when they're going to stop. You know, just a little $100, right?
Thank you. Thank you. Oh,
Just a few other things we heard at our table really quickly. We heard that carding's associated with bias. We heard that no one knows about the regulation. We heard that there's aggression. We heard that what's suspicious, that's very vague. And we heard about personal experiences where officers stopped a gentleman here for suspicious activity, for a really vague description, and he was just leaving the barber shop. We heard about the same gentleman was just waiting in his car for a friend, and then he was stopped, and then his car was searched, and he wasn't doing anything wrong. That's what carding means to people at this table.
thank you. Thank you. Another table? Behind you, Dave? Thank you.
Hey, everybody. So for the interest of time, I'll respect your 30 seconds. I think
No, you have 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
Yeah, you have 3 minutes. They had 30 seconds left. You're
Well,
okay.
Good Lord.
You're all right.
I won't speak for too long, though, because a lot of the stuff that this table discussed is what you all discussed. So I think we're majority on the same page here. I think an important thing to touch on from our table was, you know, apart from how we're treated as people of color, what is the end result of carding in the sense of what happens to all of this data? And this was already touched on, so I don't think I have to go into detail. But the important thing here is that I haven't heard mentioned yet was we do have stories of people who have lost jobs, who were denied jobs because of data that was collected on them. And these people don't even have the right to know what that data is. So if that could be fixed, at a bare minimum, that would be beneficial. So I'll leave it there.
Curtis, there's an elder to your right that has a little historical perspective that she asked if she could share. Please, thank you.
Hello, my name is Anne. I've lived in Toronto most of my life. This issue about carding, I got curious. I did some research on the internet. In the 1950s, the decision was made as people were coming in from the eastern part of the world, out of communist Russia and the other behind the Iron Curtain, as we called it then. It would appear that the Roman Catholic Church and the Toronto Police Department decided to collude and write up people from those areas, those who belonged to the Communist Party. These were newcomers. These were people that were trying to make their lives in this country. And what the status quo decided to do was to check up on them. The police were checking to see where they came from and what their beliefs were. Were they communists? And if they were communists, how was that going to affect things like housing, jobs? Does any of this sound familiar? This is a history that we've got in this country. We need to start looking at where all of this stuff came from and start doing something about it. Because right now, everybody's saying, oh yeah, but it's just that group of people that have come in, those racialized people. We've got to watch them. Well, guess what? My grandparents, my parents, others, they were all going through this too. We need to start taking a look at how the system makes a decision to oppress people. It doesn't matter where you come from and who you are, the system will do its best to drive us all apart and oppress us.
Thank you, Ms. Ann. Thank you. Next table. Another table that's ready to go? Great, thank you. Dave will make his way. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. Most of what we have heard is exactly what we have discussed, but mainly we are looking for some sort of resolution. We are trying to figure out how to resolve the problem. So what we recommend is that we try our very best to restore confidence in the police services between the black people, the black community, and the police services. And one way we could do that, and I do believe there are already efforts being made, in the school system, is to help our generation, the next generation. It seems as though we already feel victimized, but our children don't have to. So if we can establish more relationships in the schools with the police officers, I know in some schools they already have them, but more so in the public school system, especially in the systems like in the West End, Jane Finch area, we need to have more police presence there to establish more positive relationships with these between the children and the police officers. I do believe that may help. It may be a bit of a struggle, and I could see some heads nodding, but I do believe we have to try to make some efforts. And the other thing we spoke about is to have in these communities black and white police officers working together, just to try to restore confidence between the black community and the police services. That's all we could think of.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. So a lot of this has already been talked about, but I just want to go through a couple points that we had at our table here. The first one was to answer question 2, which I believe, when should police stop and talk in the, or sorry, what do street checks carding mean to you? So we have a couple different things here. So a violation, you lose the right of equality without bias and discrimination. Police can use vague reasoning to harass people of color. It's another form of repression and oppression, or we can see it as modern-day slavery. And also we had another one here, might touch a few hearts here, same as adding the Star of David to the Jews in the Holocaust. So it's the same type of thing, you're just basically identifying us because of how we look or, where we're from. We should try to reach out to the youth through media awareness and social media, get to educate them on forms that they can reach, forms that help them understand it, help them relate to it, things that, if they give a big report like this, nobody's gonna read it. So, just some visuals maybe, music, different ideas, arts, different things that we can reach the youth and the community, because they are the future, so they're gonna be growing up with this, and it would be best, obviously, to have educated on this topic. Carding has 0 benefits. It will create public retaliation and pushback from the public. It actually was a reverse harm on the person being stopped. It's a wheel of escalation, right? So I think it was mentioned before, you can even be seen as a snitch, just even seeing cops talking to you. They need to engage, this was also talked about before, community engagement. They should go to the barbecues and events, schools, all that type of stuff was mentioned. Engage with the community, create an open dialogue without hindering your investigation, but create that open dialogue. Say, hey, do you need help? Cops are here to serve and protect. They're not here to interpret law, they're here to enforce it. So they shouldn't just be randomly stopping people unless they have a specific reason, and an actually good reason. If they see a criminal activity happening, that's when, they can stop people. Be more transparent and not abrasive. Don't use these laws so that, you can trick someone into giving their ID or trick someone into admitting something or anything like that. Just be transparent, say, hi, how are you doing today? I'm doing this investigation, I just want to come and talk to you. Last point, not every officer should have the privilege to card. More training for officers beforehand. They should have some sort of test or some sort of, what was the word I used here? A quality, ethical, emotional test or something to pass where, not every cop has the privilege to card, but if you pass this test and you have this equality patch on you, then yes, we trust you that you make those right decisions when you do stop someone of color, that, you engage properly and not just harass them. And yeah, that should be it.
Thank you. Dave, I see this table in the middle front, and then maybe we can do that one. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Firstly, I grew up in the UK, in London, England, and I recall, I didn't tell my table this, it just came to me as I was sitting here. When I was going to school, I remember 2 of my friends coming back to school after the weekend and telling me that they had been stopped by the police and that information had been taken. I say that to say that this isn't a new thing, and it's not exclusive to Canada either. We went through all of the questions, but we used them as a guide, and I have 4 points that came out of our conversation. One of the points was that the Office of the Independent Review Director, the OIPRD, needs to be autonomous, safe, and independent. That should reside with a third party almost, an agency or organization. The second point was around systemic issues, and it was really about reviewing the recruitment process of police. So we talked about the issues are numerous in how police are cultured, and to break that down, we have to look at how we recruit and where we recruit and who we recruit. We should require community placements. We felt that it would be important that police officers, particularly new police officers, should understand the communities that they're going to end up being placed in. And so a community placement similar to the kinds that faculties of education in the universities place teacher candidates into communities, not into schools, but into communities to do a placement of 6 to 8 weeks. So they get to understand a variety of different inner city or different types of communities, racialized, whatever, before they actually get placed there as a teacher, so they understand where these young people and their families are coming from. That would work very well, I think, with the police officers before we put them on the street as beat officers. The third point was investment in training, and somebody else, I think this young man had just mentioned that before, that we talked a lot about training, and we felt that there was a big gap there. So, step one is obviously to recruit the right people, but then the second thing would be to train them well, and training should be ongoing. And also, we talked about a progressive discipline process, and again, someone talked about what was the penalty, and we tried to move away from penalizing police officers and rather talked about progressive discipline as any other employer would do with an employee who was having some difficulties following process, is we wouldn't fire them immediately, and we wouldn't fine them necessarily, but we would put in place a progressive discipline process, and at some point it wouldn't work and we would let them go. I think that should exist, and not just for, obviously, for carding, but certainly for carding, where people aren't following some simple basic structures and processes, there should be some progressive discipline. And finally, we talked about changing community and societal perception of police carding, street checks, and that being a police officer should be an honor. Like, I've seen on the TV a lot recently how American soldiers, and perhaps the same applies to US soldiers, we just don't see them so often, it's an honor to serve. And that's what it should be for police officers. It should be an honor to serve. So I shouldn't wake up one day and say, I want to be a police officer and just move into it like that. It almost should be a calling. So those are the 4 points we talked about. And there's a 5th point that we didn't document here. I think you did document it there, though. We talked about the consultations themselves. We questioned the locations of some of the consultations. For example, there was a downtown consultation, but it was in a nicer neighborhood. Young and Bloor is not necessarily a neighborhood where many people get stopped, but if you were to go to Moss Park downtown, you'd find that almost everybody there, whether you work, live, or play there, would have had an experience of carding. And so we just asked that as you go forward and you plan these things, do you think about where the people are? And also who is represented at these gatherings. For example, again, the judge talked earlier about the indigenous lands that we are privileged to be on, but there are no indigenous people represented at the tables. So we just need to be mindful of who are here and who is represented at the tables and whose voices are being included in the dialogue.
Thank you. So the time for your table's up. Sorry, sir. Thank you.
Three chances to another table.
Yeah, but I was doing it thoughtfully. So, but we'll see if we can come back to you. I just want to make one thing clear. When we go, just to speak to this brother's point, when we do our sort of northern consultations, Thunder Bay, et cetera, we actually have special and specific meetings just for the Indigenous community on top of expecting them in any of these meetings, but we actually do a significant amount of outreach. We actually have a lead on Indigenous consultations as part of our team as well. And I'm just not to directly respond to you, but to let everybody know that. So thank you for raising it. Yeah. This table, thank you.
Hi. To go off of what has been said about policing and their mindset, we had the privilege of having a law enforcement person at our table, and the conversation was very candid and very transparent. And what was stated from all of us, but also acknowledged, was the mindset of the officers. How do we vet the mindsets? When they come in and then they're now police officers, they're coming in with a filter. Everybody has had a lifestyle before they become a police officer, and they've already had experiences. Now they're now in the position of authority. How are they now executing what they're being taught against the biases that they've already had in their mind from their experiences? So what was stated is mindset of police officers are not being addressed. There is a filter that has to be addressed, change from the inside out, not just giving them, their training manual and say, here, this is what you can't do, but then for them not to do that, there has to be a mindset of them knowing that what they're going to execute, as in carding, coming from a personal experience. But if they don't have that personal experience, then the execution is going to be delivered differently. So the acknowledgement was, how do you vet a mindset? You can vet by their physicality, and they're doing the beep test and they're doing the math, but how can you vet their minds? And the culture of secrecy internally within the police force, even if you see a colleague slipping up, you really can't come forward and speak about what that person did, because there's now the fear for yourself as an officer. So that was it was really refreshing to hear that, because we all kind of sense it, but to actually hear it. So the culture of secrecy internally that that you can't address colleagues, misconduct. And then the solution was finding the people from inside that's going to be courageous to make the change. Because we can have all of these implementations, but if we don't have the people within the force to actually admit that this is an issue and want to change it, and if they might not know the historical background of what carding came from, like what I just heard, and everything else, then we're just going to, it's going to be a repeating wheel. So also, what we've had at this table was a lot of experiences of carding, which some of them were just jaw-dropping hearing. And in the interest of them, just as you said, for the experiences to be heard, if you don't mind me just listing off a couple.
Can I give you a yellow card?
Sure, thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
So we had an incident of a girlfriend just leaving her boyfriend's home, just happened to be in an area that was having a bad situation. She was on the payphone. Police asked her, who are you talking to? She said, my boyfriend, what is his address? She gave them, and then 2 days later, the police went into the boyfriend's house because she was just in the neighborhood on the payphone when an incident happened, and the boyfriend came home with his home raided. And it's like, what? How did he even know? And she's like, well, I gave them the address. I was on the phone when something was happening, and they just assumed that she was talking to the person that did it. Another incident was grandson. We're talking about age, a culture. Grandson already have his white peer telling him, I don't have to be worried about being pulled over because I'm white. And that is from a great 8-year-old being stating that right now. We talk about education in the school system. So we have sexual curriculum. I think at this age, we need to be giving our young people, teens, elementary education on carding. This is how a curriculum about that, so the young people know their rights and they know, what they can and cannot, say and do. And then the media, we talk about town hall meetings.
The last one?
Yes. So we talk about town hall meetings are important, but they're not effective enough to inform the public. So some public service announcements should be mandated across all media platforms, radio, TV, news, papers, to inform the public about street checks, carding regulations. So that should be something that's mandated for all media.
Thank you. Okay. That table hadn't gone yet, and then we'll see if we have time for the gentleman. Who's going to speak? Give him the mic. Thank you.
So we just kind of had talked about like stories from our lives. We didn't really go through all of the questions, and we're gonna document them and hand them back out. One of the things we talked about, though, was, have we noticed a change in carding since the regulation was put into effect? So some people at the table have had experiences of being carded still over the past year. So yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I think, everybody in here is recounting stories, and if you're going through this questionnaire here to answer the questions, I think everybody's kind of coming up with the same answers, right? I'm not hearing much different things from, different tables and things like that. We're hearing different experiences of people that's had different interactions with the police and things like that. But one of the things that I heard is, this carding thing is not something new. It's not something that started yesterday, or, this is something that goes back for generations. It's something that goes back for decades, right? And what I'd like to know at the end of the day is, what is the end game for all of this? You know what I mean? Where does this go? Because somebody here said that information right now is power. I'm into IT, right? And we guard the information, we guard it because that information, once in the hands of somebody else, can do a lot of damage, right, to an individual. Now, when your information gets collected, you're a teenager, you're going to school, you're doing nothing, and your information gets collected, and all of a sudden something happens, and maybe you get pulled over, and all of a sudden you're known to the police, right? For what? Are you known because you're a crossing guard? Are you known because you volunteer down at, College Street at the police station? Are you known because you volunteer at the hospital? Are you known because, you're involved in some sort of nefarious gang? You know what I mean? So what is the end game for all this information? That is just my question, and I'd like to know. All right.
I just wanted to have one final comment based on my research 10 years ago as a graduate student. We didn't talk about this at my table, but one of the things I want you guys to consider is the role of conservative ideologies and African Americans have been in America for centuries. And so a lot of the policing comes out of centuries of oppression. In Toronto and in Canada, for the most part, most black people have only been here for 40 years. However, Toronto police has similar types of policing. Toronto police is replicating types of policing and a war on drugs based on the American model. And I've worked in prisons, and they've arrested so many black youth since the mid-90s when Harris came to power and implemented a common sense revolution to introduce this type of policing by swelling the police budget as well as investing in the construction of super jails that since 1995 to now, 25 years later, they've arrested so many black youth in Ontario through carding that they've had to shut down many of the traditional jails throughout the province, which would hold 100 to 200, 300 inmates, and they've built super jails throughout the province that are now holding 1,500 to 2,000 prisoners. And so the rise of the prison industrial complex in America came out of 4 centuries of oppression. In Canada, that prison industrial complex has been inflicted on a community that's only been here for 3 or 4 decades.
Thank you. Thank you. Dave, can I just get the shot? And sir, you have 30 seconds.
Thank you, sister. Thank you very much. My name is Miguel, and I'm a regular at Toronto Police Services Board. Is Councillor Cheney in attendance? I think he's gone. Because I have a question for Councillor Chin Lee, a member of the Toronto Police Services Board and a work councillor for this neighborhood. I've been carded many times, and I'm a resident of Toronto Community Housing, first and foremost. My sister Ann at the back can tell me how many times police has been coming to our buildings, because they are the agents of the landlord. TCAC allows the Toronto Police to come to our units anytime, anywhere, because they are acting on behalf of the management. So this information, I want to make a recommendation to please to give it to Toronto Community Housing Corporation, the board of directors, so that this information is posted on the bulletin boards. Because this is the way to educate our residents, to let them know that what are your rights under these new rules. The other thing I want to commend is the OPRD report form is only available when you walk into a police station. One of the things that it talks about the receipt is that you can, if you have grounds to complain, you can go to the police station and pick up one of these forms. How many of you think in this room will go to a police station to pick up a OPRD form? Any volunteers? No. So what we need to do is ask the government through the Judge Tulloch recommendation is that that form should be available at the libraries, or our libraries, our community centers, so we don't have to be relive again the experience and go into a police division. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. All right. Thank you. I believe that I've covered all the tables. Is that true? Perfect. We want to remind you that if you did not get to say everything you were thinking or share, that please feel free to link with us on these multiple options. In particular, our website, there is space for you to make a written submission, and we really encourage you to do that. If you have more to say, we'd love to hear from you. Is there a question, sir?
I just want
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. Thanks. Thank you. I think I've covered. So yeah, so those are we are going to be continuing this consultative process. We are in Brampton on Thursday, as my colleague mentioned. We are, as of March 20th, back on the road after that in Hamilton, Durham, et cetera, we are across the province. So check us on our website to know where we will be next. Share this information with your friends and colleagues and family. And Justice Tulloch has the last word, please. Thank you.
Okay, I just want to reiterate what Kike has said and thank each and every one of you for coming out again. I've been listening very carefully and making notes of all the comments that I've heard from all the tables who participated. And I can assure you that we're going to be reflecting on these. And at the end of the day, a lot of your comments will be reflected in recommendations. So again, thanks so much. And if you have friends and relatives who live outside of this area and are in an area where we'll be holding consultations, please, ask them to come out and speak to us. Now, I just want to assure you that we are having, these are the public consultations, but we've had many other consultations. And we're, meeting, we've been meeting with Indigenous communities, both in urban areas as well as in the north. And we continue to have these consultations until the end of April, all right? So just want to let you know that. Thanks again for coming out.
Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Good night. Thank you.